When you think of the Renaissance, what names pop into your head? Machiavelli, the Medicis, Raphael, Michelangelo? Well, there's probably one name that pops in your head more than most, and that name is Leonardo da Vinci. A madman, a scientist, a genius, an artist, an architect, and just an all-around badass Renaissance man. Few people probably think of this man as someone who contributed to advance the medical field in his day. But 500 years later, some of those contributions are present in medical teachings of biology still. Others were completely lost to history until the 20th century when they were rediscovered, and holy shit, were they accurate to what we learned in the meantime. Hello listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Mercenary Podcast. This week's healthcare history topic is going to be the legendary Leonardo da Vinci. We are going to talk about his early life and education, his scientific studies in the fields of anatomy and physiology, and above all, his contributions to the medical field that are still miraculous 500 years later. But before we get into this week's episode, be sure to drop a like on this video and subscribe so you never miss an upload. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcasting platform, be sure to follow so that way you're notified whenever a new episode drops. Be sure to head over to themercenaryshop.com to pick yourself up some merch, such as the License to Heal hoodie. Why? So others may live. And with that, let's get into this week's topic. Leonardo da Vinci was born April 15th of 1452 to Pierre da Vinci and a woman named Caterina. His father was an educated man and his mother was a peasant. He was born out of wedlock and his parents never married. However, he was raised on his father's estate as a legitimate son and not a bastard. This made him a little fortunate. Fortunate in the fact that he had an education from a young age, being taught several subjects ranging from writing to math and also some other various sciences. Very early in his life, however, his father picked up on his abilities and commenced him into an apprenticeship. An apprenticeship with who? An apprenticeship with Andrea del Verrocchio at the age of 14. Leonardo lived and worked in this house for 7 years and met many other bright artists and minds of the time. During this time, Leonardo also took an interest in architectural works and science, and became devoted to drawing both topics. He also attempted to improve his understanding of human form through some post-mortem dissections in his youth around 19 or 20 years old, which, interestingly enough, is about the age that we start doing dissections on cadavers in medical school or nursing school. It's around 19, 20, 21, somewhere in that area. Prior to him completing the apprenticeship, however, his contributions to his master's works of art were so good that he was accepted into the Painters Guild of Florence and was allowed to work independently even while still an apprentice. In 1482, Leonardo would move to Milan at the age of 30. He would serve under a man named Ludovico Forza, who would later go on to become the Duke of Milan. Leonardo had to apply for this position, but Leonardo was a very clever man. Knowing that his soon-to-be boss had aspirations to rise to power, he might have smudged his application a little bit. He highlighted his own abilities as an engineer of war that didn't really exist yet. During his time under his master, he would go on to paint some of the most famous works of his life, such as The Last Supper and Lady with an Ermine, whatever that is. Also during his time in Milan, he slowly built more on his understanding of anatomy. In 1489, Leonardo uses his connections to get his hands on a cadaver skull and goes to work dissecting it. Why? Well, curiosity, that's why. He starts noting the cavernous areas inside the hollow structure and starts writing down observations in his various notes. This work starts tying in more and more with his interest in arts and in architecture. In 1492, one of the most recognizable contributions he made was a drawing in his codex, The Vitruvian Man. The Vitruvian Man, which seems like a simple drawing, was Leonardo's reimagination of human proportion and architecture, based upon the Roman architect Vitruvius and Vitruvius's writings. When I was in nursing school, we learned about this thing called anatomical position and correct anatomical position. The thing is, anatomical position is literally the Vitruvian Man. To this day, that drawing is the reference point for ideal anatomy and anatomical position. How many times can I say anatomical position in this one little blurb? From a medical science standpoint, he didn't contribute much other documentation for a few years that was at least notable enough for me to find online. This would be the last contribution this go round in Milan, at least until his later life, thanks to the French invading and taking over the city and overthrowing his boss.
Faster world domination! Wahoo! Total world domination!
However, after relocating himself back to Florence and starting to work for the feared Caesar Borgia, son of the Pope, he dives back into the expansion of his scientific endeavors at the age of 50. At the age of 50, however, Leonardo is still as thirsty for knowledge as ever and starts carving up cadavers and drawing what he sees yet again. But instead of just drawing what he finds anatomically, he starts theorizing what makes what work in the body, which is a big step up from his younger years, where he was just kind of observing what he was dissecting. He starts picking up at the Santa Maria Nuova Hospital, in a sense, in the morgue, dissecting more bodies. Hospitals in the 14 to 1500s probably have a pretty steady supply of corpses lying around. However, because of religion and scientific norms of the time, he probably had to use bodies of the unclaimed and beggars for his dissections, and may or may not have had some of his lab and studio assistants steal them from time to time and bring them to him in secret. Allegedly.
Consorting? Preposterous. When was the last time you saw or spoke with Ezio Auditore? Grazie, Ezio. Sorry about that. I've grown accustomed to their abuses. What of the body? Bring it inside and put it with the others. Others?
There was a study of one patient he had that was 100 years old. Very, very old at that time. Leonardo was bedside when he expired, and Leonardo was inspired to do an autopsy to see what could kill a man so sweetly. During his dissection, he gets to the heart, and is looking at the arteries that feed blood to the heart, and he thinks, these seem narrow compared to what I normally see. He gets to the liver of the man, and is kind of in awe. He goes, he's a desiccated, and is like congealed bran broth, in color and in substance. So, to translate this into today's medical terms, he described both coronary artery disease, as well as liver cirrhosis, all in one patient's autopsy about 300 years before these were even working theories in medicine. To be crystal clear, a 50-year-old man in the beginning of the 1500s was discovering the early workings of heart disease and liver disease in an autopsy. And 300 years later, some poor sucker in Australia is getting conned into laying in the belly of a whale carcass for 30 hours to cure his rheumatoid arthritis. Anyway, during this period of Da Vinci's life is where he made his most meaningful contributions to the medical sciences. Aside from his autopsies and cadaver dissection, this is where the theorizing really comes into play. He collaborated with a famous anatomist of the time named Marcantonio della Torre. Though some theories differed from each other, this is where Da Vinci really started to journal more and more advanced theories of physiology. In some of Leonardo's notes, he begins to draw diagrams and describe in detail the act of breathing. Something that seems trivial in today's time, something taught in base level physiology. Leonardo was a notable figure in theorizing the role of the ribs, the intercostal muscles, and the diaphragm in his notes. Furthermore, this man went into the depths of studying the trachea and the bronchioles, making them look almost identical to what we see in modern anatomy textbooks. Aside from the respiratory system, he was able to predict eddy formation and blood flow just beyond the aortic valve. An eddy formation is the swirl of fluid beyond an obstacle and the countercurrent that is made. It is basically a dance of a swirl and a swirl and a swirl. Like this. He predicted it without the use of ultrasounds, echocardiograms, or intra-aortic flow meters, or any of the modern tools we have available to us today, which is just mind-boggling crazy, because nobody else really started to touch on any of these discoveries for over like 150 years. And each of those people that started to figure this out thought they were the first ones discovering it. Additionally, he theorized that the heart was a muscle that contracts spontaneously, which nowadays seems like a no-brainer. Back then, there were conflicting theories. For example, the prevailing theory in the medieval times was that the heart churns the blood throughout the body, which we know today is completely not it. Leonardo also noted the difference between the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary vein, and the aorta, and the superior and inferior vena cavas, which is just crazy. In the realm of eyesight and optics, Leonardo once again was showing strokes of absolute genius. In his journals that were translated, he talked about the transition of the animal pupils in low light scenarios. He said something to the effect of, when in light, the pupil gets smaller because it's a bright out. When it's a dark, the pupil gets a bigger because it allows them to see better in the dark. It sounds fancier in the translation, but I'm a simple ape. To study the anatomy of the eye, Leonardo went through some trial and error, one could say. He figured out if you cut into the eyeball, the gel inside kind of just loosely leaks out and it loses its structure and its integrity, and it becomes not great for visualizing anatomy. But if you lightly boil the eye, it kind of changes the viscosity of that gel in there, congeals it, and you can dissect it and study it a little bit easier. Leonardo was very interested in this approach to science. That's why he learned how to boil eyeballs appropriately to cut them open. For this section, we're going to start at the top of the list, and head, the brain. This guy mapped the cranial nerves. I couldn't find if he charted exactly what all the cranial nerves did or controlled, but he did at least find most of them. He definitely did find a very important one, the optic nerve, or nerves, technicality. Anyway, he drew in his notes the eyeballs, and the nerves that attach them, tracking posteriorly to the optic chasm, where they cross, and the posterior insertion into the optical, hold on, this word's gonna befuddle me a little bit, into the optical geniculate body. In the beginning of the 1500s, he was the first man to visualize the separate ventricles of the brain, being two ventricles. And he was able to demonstrate the inferior view of the brain with the pons and the medulla and the cerebellum all in one drawing. Still, mind-boggling. To further add to his absurd understanding of the human body, beyond the nervous system, speaking of which he traced the spinal cord through a 4K charcoal drawing of the human spine, and that human spine went along really, really well with the anatomically correct rest of the skeleton that he drew, including the ribs, arms, legs, skull, and all of it's cataloged in Leonardo's dark psychopathic codex notebooks. The bones, the way they moved, how many there were, and on top of all of it, the bones, the way they moved, how many there were, and to top it all off, a rudimentary mapping of all the muscles in the human body, including the detail of the mechanical leverage they all apply for human movement. That's pretty mind-boggling. Still, it's crazy. The more I talk about this stuff, the more excited I get, because in the 1600s and 1700s, medicine didn't seem this intricately detailed up until like the early 1900s. Like, you go to an art museum and you're looking at some barbaric scenes from like the early mid 1800s where they're just cutting into people and just kind of hoping for the best. I mean, for shit's sake, they were sticking stuff in eyeballs in the early 1900s, thinking it was a fix for psychosis. It's crazy. The next system he covered in his drawings were the GI and GU system, or to put it less scientifically, the gastrointestinal, and the genitourinary systems. Essentially, he mapped both of these systems in great detail. He knew where and what the kidneys were doing, where they were pushing the pee to, and what orifice it was leaving through. He drew it for both male and female bodies, very accurately. When it came to the internal organs of the GI tract, he was able to demonstrate the esophagus, leading to the stomach, leading to the small intestine, leading to the large intestine, leading all the way through the poop chute. For all of his accuracies, he did have some wrong theories, and one of those was the digestive tract aided in raising and lowering the diaphragm in breathing. We know that's not how the intestines and the diaphragm interact with each other today. But his drawings, nonetheless, are spot on. On to the extension of the GU system. He also had the prostates and the testes drawn out in great detail. Same with the female reproductive tract. Great detail. The uterus, the cervix, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries. It wasn't drawn with the same incredible detail we have in modern printed textbooks with ultra zoom graphics and animation, but it's incredible nonetheless that he was able to do this with just what he could see in his dissections with charcoal and old school paper. Even more incredible, he drew a fetus in the womb. Full on placenta, uterus, fetal position. Looking at his drawings takes me back to anatomy and physiology classes like years ago. Leonardo would go on to have all of these drawings, theories, and observations jotted down in dozens of notebooks that spanned most of his adult life. In the last couple years of his life, he would leave Italy and move to France under the invitation of King Francis I. He took with him his most trusted assistant, as well as his wealth of written knowledge. On May 2nd of 1519, Leonardo would die at the age of 67 years old. So, in his heyday, Leonardo examined over 30 human cadavers, which is more than any other anatomist or scientist in his time even dreamed of. On top of examining the anatomy of dozens or hundreds of animals throughout his life, yet he didn't get credit for any of these groundbreaking discoveries until the 20th century, when a push came to publish his notebooks. Why didn't he publish them himself? Great question. By all accounts, it seems that he meant to, but died before getting there. And his assistant, who inherited all of his works, didn't publish them either. And it's not stated why. Anyhow, after his death, all of that important work was lost in a royal estate in France, to only be rediscovered in the mid-1800s in the Royal Library at Windsor Castle, on a shelf collecting dust. So, to recap the last however many minutes of this video. A small Italian child, born to a higher class man and a peasant woman, out of wedlock, goes on to live with his dad during the early years of the Renaissance. He goes on to receive an elementary education at home, where it's noted he's a pretty special kid. His dad sends him off to an apprenticeship at a young age, where he is working with a great artist and is around a bunch of other bright minds of the early Renaissance time. At 20 years old, he is considered a master artist and is able to contribute to works of other masters. In his 20s, his tendencies to start cutting into things and writing down what he sees really kicks in, and he starts with animals and eventually gets some human parts to start working with and taking notes of. I feel like if any kid would start cutting into things today and someone noticed it, there would be just giant red flags going off constantly. He uses these observations to start making his works of art even more lifelike with the tools of the day. Growing out of his apprenticeship, he moves to Milan with the confidence of a big baller, applying to work under Forza as his lead artist, war engineer, and all-around contractor. For doing baller setups for his parties, he creates the Vitruvian Man and starts closely studying skulls. But thanks to the French, Leonardo had to relocate and find new employment. After moving, This man goes on to create more masterpieces and dives further into science and anatomy, cutting up as many cadavers as he possibly could, somewhere around 30 over the course of 10 to 15 years. This madman writes down everything and creates contributions to pretty much every human body system with just theories and what his eyes can see and observe. And holy crap, was he accurate. So accurate that his theories, generations later, turn out to be more accurate than famous anatomists he was working with at the time. After working in Italy until his heart's desires and an exclusive invite moved him to France, he organized those studies as best he could, presumably with the intention of publishing them. However, fate would have other plans, and he passed away and left his works with his most trusted pupil, and somehow they became lost for hundreds of years until rediscovery in the 1800s, when some people with no knowledge of having these notebooks just happens to find them in a library in a castle. This causes a historical uproar in the 1900s, with scholars and historians pushing to have all the works published, as they are considered priceless international treasures. Fast forward to today, and you have a nerdy podcaster covering all of the medical stuff found. Yeah. That's gonna do it for today's episode, everyone. If you have made it this far through the video, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something good, and I hope you enjoyed today's topic. As always, if you like today's video, drop a like on it. It helps with the algorithm. Also, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Follow along on your favorite podcasting platform. Be sure to head over to the Mercenary shop and check out some new merch. I just put up some Christmas stuff. It helps support the channel and the work I'm doing over here. Stay cool, stay healthy, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode.